Hello, lovelies, and welcome. My name is Maya, and I just would like to welcome you to this kind of workshop or presentation on a ceremony. This is called a ceremony in our everyday life. So, what we are going to learn today is basically how to create your own perfect recipe, just combining few basic principles by studying different traditional practices. So let's dive straight in. First, I just would like to maybe introduce myself a little bit more so you know where I'm coming from and why am I actually talking about any of this. So in the last 4 years, I spent pretty much like full-time studying with my teachers from North America, who is immersed in a Lakota culture and has been studying with a medicine man, like we've been medicine people for like many generations now. And they still hold their traditions really strongly and really deeply. One thing what I have to say about tradition is if it works, you just don't change it. And I really love this principle, and this is why I also decided to study with this teacher, or with this society. It's called the Helpers Mentoring Society. If you are interested to study a little bit more, then definitely look them up. Because when I was trying to create my own ceremonies, which I've been trying to do for most of my adult life, really, I realized at some point that I'm just really actually coming out of my depths, because we create our own rituals and ceremonies, but then sometimes they would work and sometimes they wouldn't work. And so I was just really like, well, what is it? What makes it work? And I really then wanted to know, and I wanted to study more deeply just with one tradition. And in some way, it doesn't matter which tradition you choose if you decide to go deeper, because they've got something that works. And then looking at the different traditions or different ceremonies, of traditional people, I realized some things really repeat or are in common. And I find this really interesting, and that really then brought me to the more of an understanding, like, oh, we can create our rituals. We just need to follow some basic recipes, and it's going to work. So this is what I'm really actually excited to finally share with you. I originally come from Slovakia, and with when I grew up, I still grew up in a very traditional cultures in many ways. So I remember, doing different, I guess, more of a little rituals or remembrance, on a special occasions. We mostly mark the times of the year, but there was always something to celebrate. So there was not just the Christmas and Easter, but there is, like, as the seasons are changing, there's always something to do. And so, just out of curiosity, like one of those traditions, of my home countries is at the end of the winter. Traditionally we would make this really large straw doll and get her like fully dressed, and then the whole procession would go down, like, traditionally, like in the villages. And people, whilst they're singing, they're carrying this this straw doll down somewhere to the flowing water, to the creek. And when they come there, then they set her on a fire, and then they let her go down to the creek just through the melting ice. And this was to symbolize the end of the winter, and it was also like saying, like, okay, now we are ready for a new chapter. And of course, the winter would come, or the spring would come, regardless of this ceremony. And yet it does something for a human psyche, because we mark these things for ourselves, and that's really important. So now I live in Australia, so together it just makes really, really interesting combination for me, because now I'm also learning about this land and traditions of this land. And it's actually really beautiful to come to understand different cultures and different principles, but then seeing really deeply what they have in common. So that's in a way why I'm here. And now, I'm just going to guess, like, why are you actually here? Well, first of all, I imagine, or when I'm talking to people, why they are drawn to a course like this, it's because people are really hungry for ritual, and we don't know necessarily how to do the ritual because we are not growing up in a culture that is supportive of these traditions. And so maybe you are doing your own rituals, but you just don't know if what you're doing it's actually the right thing. Maybe you are completely beginning and you're just like, I don't even know where to start. I love watching people when they're doing rituals, but actually I don't know where to start. So, and this is the perfect place to be in, because I will guide you step by step where to start and where to go. So sometimes you will probably hear me, making analogies with baking cake. I'm also like mom, and I do, lots of baking. So to me, it's still just like, well, it's just like a recipe. So we get the basic ingredients, and that's what we are going to do in the first part of this presentation. We are just going to talk about the basic ingredients, and then we are going to learn how do we put them together so they work. You don't need any fancy equipments. You don't actually really need anything to start your ceremony, because everything what you will ever need you will find very freely around you in the nature. So don't worry if you don't have rattles or drums or anything special. Like, if you will need anything, I will let you know what it is. Any one of the things that I sometimes hear from people, just like, well, I don't know if I can do this because everybody's using ceremonies. They seem to be traveling a lot, and they've been in South America or in Africa, and they've been learning all of these things, and everybody know how to do a cacao ceremony. It's like, don't worry, you don't have to travel much. You just need to listen to what is actually close around you, because all the information we need is usually actually really close to us. What can we expect? Well, usually I actually run this workshop in person rather than online, but having a year as we just had, everything had to move online. So here we are. What people say when after attending the workshop, they just got so much out of it, because they kind of pick up a new little rituals or practices for themselves, so they can then build them together into the bigger ceremonies, and that's clearly very helpful to some. So let's start with our very first ritual practice. If you do only this practice only and nothing else from what we are talking about today, then this is still the gold. This is why I'm also putting it at the very beginning, because this is one single practice which makes the most change in people's life. No joking. When I found out first about this particular practice, which was about 4 years ago, and I started doing it on a daily basis, I could see within a week how my life is changing. And then practicing it every single day for those years, it always changes us, as any regular practice would change us, really. So what I'm talking about is a water gratitude practice. It's super, super simple. It goes like this. In the morning, when you have your first glass of water, you say your first gratitude. You don't have to even say it loud, you don't have to concentrate too hard, but as you are drinking your glass of water, you feel that water kind of within you. You feel it entering your body, and as you are drinking it, you're just thinking like, well, what am I grateful for today? And that's pretty much it. If you want to expand on it a little bit, sometimes I get my glass of water, in the morning, and I just sit with it just for like 4 or 5 seconds even, and just imagine like, well, where is that water coming from? Maybe it's coming from the underground. The water what I'm drinking is usually a rainwater, so I just imagine, all of those clouds and the raindrops, and then it just comes down, and then suddenly it's here in my glass, and I'm drinking it. And to me, like, I just have to kind of marvel at this cycle to start with. And with this marvel, in my mind, I also get a gratitude, just like, wow, it's actually so perfect and it's so wonderful. And here it is just for me to nourish me. If you are, for example, like my mom, who doesn't drink water in the morning, then I recommend you drink it with whatever liquid you do, like if it's a coffee, then being, in your coffee. What we are trying to achieve is to find something which is really simple and that you do every single day, so you can put it in a practice and it's not a hard work at the same time. This is what happens to lots of our practices. We learn something really great and exciting, and then we think like, this is going to change my life, and then 1 week later or 2 weeks later you realize it's gone because it just becomes too hard. And so what I'm trying to also do is to give you something which is really easy to remember, and it doesn't take a long time, yet it makes a really, really big change. I think it's really important to talk at this point. Why would I put gratitude on a first place? Pretty much all traditional ceremonies that I know of have gratitude as one of the main practices, or main ritual. Like, you start and you finish the ceremony very, very often with a gratitude. The gratitude can be directed in a different directions, but it's always a part of it. And also, like, gratitude to me is a first step towards the prayer, or in the prayer. And because if you are talking about creating any ritual, what we are trying to achieve is to have a regular practice, because there's no point of you coming into the ritual and then trying to figure out like, well, I'm just going to make this really beautiful, I don't know, theater or something. But if you're actually not feeling what you're doing, if you haven't practiced it already, then it's not going to have too much power. You're not going to basically create what you are trying to create. So practicing gratitude on a daily basis gives you that very immediate drop into that gratitude space. So when you are in a ceremony, then you know exactly where to access it. What does it feel like? And then you can really, really feel it in your heart. And so you are not just speaking empty words, but you are actually feeling the gratitude, which is the point of this practice. And yeah, that's why we are doing it daily. Let's have a look on our next one. I mentioned already the prayer, or we're starting a prayer with the gratitude so often. So, this is also like for your personal practice, but you might also use it for like those bigger ceremonies, should you choose to, hold anything like that. I think it's really important to even talk or think for a moment. What is the prayer? And this is where I would like you to take just 1 minute for yourself and think, what does a prayer mean to me? If I say prayer, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? So I would be very curious to know, when you do that, do you go to some religion to which you grow up with? Do you go into your spiritual beliefs that you practice right now? Do you give gratitude first, or do you ask for something? I've been practicing gratitude for a very long time and a prayer, and it's really funny, when I get into that, like really quick, what is the prayer, or what is your first prayer that comes to your mind? I can see how my mind still goes into the prayer that I used to grow up in a Christian tradition. And to me, it was often like, oh God, please, do something, give me something, help me with something. And it's really interesting because, when I'm in my conscious mind and I'm preparing myself for a prayer, I go slightly somewhere else. And this is also like part of my, then my morning practice. When I do my morning prayer, I started now with the gratitude rather than with asking for something. Prayer to me at this point is a two-way street. You ask and it's given, but it goes kind of both direction. And what it means to go both direction, it's not only that you ask, you also give something. And one of the things what we can give is offering of a gratitude. Then, in here on this slide, we've got two words which often come up because they do come from Lakota people. So that's Wakantanka and Tonkashila. I want to talk about them just briefly because they keep popping up now in a different songs, which are like more popular songs, or songs with a prayer, and it's sometimes we just don't know what these things mean, but it's because I learn, from Lakota culture, this is something what we use like a lot, and it also informs me how I actually view what am I praying to, or like how am I addressing my ceremony. So there's two things. So Wakantanka, often it's translated as a great spirit. When the first missionaries came into North America and they've been learning the language, they simply first translated it as a god because they could see the Indian people like praying to Wakantanka. It is quite different idea than a god as the singular god what we hold in a Christian tradition. And also, the translation of a great spirit is also not quite adequate, but it's probably the closest we are going to get to it, because it's also it's talking about a creation. It's talking about something that is mysterious and that we don't actually understand. The second one is Tonkashila. Tonkashila, again, it's often translated as grandfathers, and when it's used in a prayer or in a song, it's definitely not meant to be as your like physical grandfather, like your father's father. The grandfathers is more like beings which are older than us, beings that are older than a humanity. And when we are singing traditional songs in Lakota, and then we are addressing four directions, some of those songs are saying like, oh, look to the west, there are your grandfathers, look towards the north, there are your grandfathers. And it just means there are like these greater beings which are smarter than us. And so we also, often, address our prayer to Tonkashila. One of the things with the prayer, I also find that we don't have to overcomplicate things. and I will probably repeat this, a few times, over the next couple of hours. Simplicity is the key. You don't have to create big and fancy ceremonies or rituals for them to work. The simple things actually work often better, and not mixing lots of elements together also works better. To me, if you choose to follow one tradition, then I suggest you pick your tools which are going, from that direction. So, for example, if you are drawn to do something like a cacao ceremony, which I presume you would have a training if you do that. But let's say you are going to work with something which comes from South America, or you decide to do something which comes from North America, or you do something which comes from Europe or from India. That is absolutely fine. I think what I'm trying to say is it's not the best to mix completely different traditions together. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. So talking about the Tonkashila and grandfathers and our ancestors, this is also like one of really important parts of traditional ceremony is connection to your ancestors. And again, it means to your physical ancestors. So you should know your blood lineage, ideally, or at least know some names, like find out what you know about your grandparents or the great grandparents. It's actually to be fully present and to know who we are. The best place to start is to look at your own roots. We are in a culture when we don't live with our grandparents and we often don't know too much about them or even about the history. And it's actually so interesting when you start digging for that information, because then you discover like, oh, this actually makes sense, because now you are just, if nothing else, you are more aware of your roots. And what we are trying to create in ceremony and ritual is the awareness. Whatever we do, we are building awareness to the world around us and to the invisible world. So connecting with your own ancestors brings more awareness to yourself, and then you can know the world around you in a better way. What is the easiest way to connect to your ancestors? Traditional teachings would tell us is to give them offerings. There's lots of ways how to connect to them. Talk to them ideally on a daily basis. Remember them. Tell stories about them, to your children or to yourself. Light a candle sometimes for them and bring them offerings. One of the offerings, what we do, and again, I would like to invite you to do this as your daily practice, is to create an ancestor plate. It's again really simple and actually doesn't take any extra energy other than just to remember, and it then just takes you less than 1 minute to actually do this. It makes a huge difference in a life when you started doing this practice. For us, for my family, what it looks like, every time we have dinner, I set plates for all of us, and then I just have a extra small plate which I call is my ancestor plate. So anything what is on a table and everything what we are eating, before we start eating, we put a little bit of each thing for this little plate and take it outside. This way we are nourishing, those roots and those ancestors. So we all know that this is a symbolic gesture, because nobody's going to come up from beyond the grave and eat the food on a plate. It's usually like the birds or some sort of a creatures will eat that. But what we are creating, what we are nourishing at this moment, is that connection to the ancestors, to remember them on a daily basis and offer something. We are giving up something. We are still giving them, usually the best parts of the food we are putting on an ancestor's plate. And this is really a symbolic gesture, yet it makes a huge difference in that connection. Your ancestors are part of your lineage. This is a first point of contact with the unseen world in some way, and they are usually the ones who are the most happy to come and help you if you've got any questions, or if you are in a trouble or you need any help. You want to create some sort of a healing, especially if you are working with a healing in a lineage line. This is a practice you really, really want to have developed. Yeah, I feel like I would be just repeating myself. I just can't stress enough how powerful this very simple practice is. And as in many of these practices, like, you just have to practice it for a little while, and then you will see what a difference does show up in your life. When somebody's asking me, like, well, what does change, for you? Like, how can you explain it? Like, it's actually so hard to explain it, except it feels like it's like, oh, I'm just growing maybe another arm, almost like it's like I never knew I needed. I was absolutely fine as I am, but suddenly I'm creating this extra rope of connection, and I can see that it informs me about the world in a very different way than my other senses do. And so that's helpful, because I feel like I am constantly building that connection. And if I want to do any ceremonial practice, this is the one thing what is really important about holding a ceremony and a space. You have to be, aware of more things than are just visible. And so this is one of those things what we can do for ourselves. Okay, let's have a look at the next thing. Here is where we are slowly starting to get to the point, like, well, how would we create, any ceremony, or what are the things we actually need, on a practical level. Because these tools what I'm giving you, like, this is something what you might actually just need to practice before you get actually into any ceremony. So the practical things is, most of the ceremonies would use this. We smudge. We use different herbs. Different traditions, again, like, use different herbs. Pretty much everybody in the West is now used to using sage. And, often we use mugwort. And in Lakota, one of the main things would be definitely using a tobacco, together with a sage and a sweetgrass. We can't get really sweetgrass in Australia, so I'm not going to actually talk about it much. Sage you buy pretty much in any health food store, and it has cleansing properties. So, before even you start doing any ceremony, and you start smudging everybody else, it's really important that you actually smudge yourself. You have to, like, prepare yourself. With mugwort, it's, you use it in a specific ceremonies. I guess you just have to work with those herbs. And then there's a completely different workshop on, like, how do we work with the different herbs. Or what are the shamanic properties. Let's just say, like, I would use them, like, if I want to, keep a different flow or different awareness, of myself. And, at the same time, I actually often use, Australian herbs. So I would use, like, either tea tree or lemon myrtle. I've got one lemon myrtle in here. This is what I look like. So I make my own sticks. And these are like really fresh herbs, very fragrant, and I use them not for cleansing as such, but I use them more when I'm trying to call in something, or if I work with menstruating women. I don't necessarily use sage. The only reason is because sage is used for a cleansing, and menstruating women are already in a really powerful ceremony of their own cleanse, and so they don't necessarily need smudging, but sometimes it's actually really helpful for the nourishment to use the different fragrant herbs like a lemon myrtle. And finally, tobacco is like my best friend. I don't necessarily smoke it, but I burn it a lot. It's a one plant which I use for my daily prayer, and in Lakota tradition, like pretty much every single ceremony would involve burning tobacco, offering tobacco, working with tobacco, praying with tobacco, making tobacco prayer ties. It's a herb which, in this tradition, it says like, all other herbs have got a different qualities, and tobacco is the one which carries our prayers to the Great Spirit, in a most clear way. And that's why we use it for a prayer, because, when we say prayer while we burn tobacco, it is said just to really carry it to that creator, or to the creation in a very clear way. And it also works for tobacco, because this is, how tobacco gives back, because every plant wants to give something back, back to the earth. And tobacco is the plant who actually gives back by serving people and serving Wakantanka. So, it's definitely one of the great things to use. What is one, or maybe the most important part of any ceremony, is actually your intention. It's really, really simple, and yet it can be sometimes confusing. So what I mean by that, I work often with ceremonies which are to do with grief, and so we are working with the ancestors, or we are working with our personal grief, and then sometimes I also do like connecting to a specific people in the past, or doing different cleansings. It's in your own heart. You have to be clear, what are you doing and why are you doing that? And this may sound actually more simple than it is, because usually we have actually lots of reasons why we try to do a ceremony, and they are sometimes potentially a little bit conflicting, or we've got a great intentions like, oh, this is what I want to do, but then we all have got our own ego, like, who sometimes can get in a way, and you kind of think like, oh, maybe I also want a little bit this, and like, surely, like, people, this will be also helpful for this, and suddenly you've got like so many reasons why you want to do ceremony. To narrow it down is generally much better, just because it provides you with a more clear results. It's just like, going to a doctor and say like, oh, can you just give me some herbs so I can feel better? And yeah, they can give you some herbs and maybe you will feel better. But if you just go like, actually, what's going on? I'm really not sleeping. Can you give me something specific, or can we work on my not sleepingness? And that way you actually have got very clear intention what you want to be working on. And so, like, I chose this beautiful picture of doing a tea ceremony, because it is a ceremony. And what is the intention in there? If you just think about it for a second, why would people do a tea ceremony? My answer to that would be, just like what we do with any other ceremony, is to create a connection, a very clear connection. I have never done a ceremony, so actually I can't really talk about like why, that ceremony is done. What I'm trying to demonstrate, it doesn't matter how big or small your ceremony is, you can feel when the intention is set really firmly and when the ceremony is carried in a very clear way, because you really feel the power of that. So let's continue with our ingredients for our ceremony. So first we are just going to talk, or we are still talking about the different tools, and then we are going to put them together. So just bear with me. If you don't still have like a clear idea, well, how are we going to do ceremony? That's okay, we are going to talk about it. First, we just need to know like what are the different aspects of ceremony, and then how to prepare them and how to prepare yourself so we can actually put them together. So one of the things what we very, very often use, and I guess like most traditions would use it, is to create an altar. Altar can just take so many different forms that I'm definitely not going to prescribe you, to say like, oh, this is what it should look like, because it could be a nature altar, it could be made out of, like completely like outside, out of natural materials. It could be altar at your own home, with your pretty things or with your important things. It can hold pictures, of your ancestors or all of your friends, or objects that are meaningful to you. Altar could just have flowers, or it could just be a painting. However, it is a way, or it is a place where we can, and for a ceremony, we would gather our energy about. So if you ever attended a Lakota ceremony, which would be, for example, a sweat lodge, building an over altar is really, really important. So it's not only like building the lodge, but building the altar as a part of the ceremony. And, and if you ever been to ceremony like that, you don't cross in front of it, you don't put like random stuff in there, like it's just created in a very specific way. I often create, because I hold sacred fire ceremonies. So for me, the altar is the fire itself. So I don't put necessarily special objects in there, but the way I treat it is, this is my altar. This is where all the energy, that kind of vortex, is basically going to come to. So I want to make sure this is very, very clear and clean for me, so on a practical level, for me, it would look like, okay, I've got a fireplace, and either I, have to like dig it out, or I clean an existing fireplace. And the way I would approach it, especially with a sacred fire, before I do anything else, I check in, like, am I in a good space to actually create an altar? Because if I'm really like all over the place and I'm not present, then it's not a good place for me to start doing that. So it's not only like what do we put on our altars if you are creating a specific ceremony, but how we approach the whole process, because it's not just a physical thing. It's so much more. We are creating an energetic thing. So if you've got an altar at home, which just lives there in your room, as and I have like several of them, then sure enough, like I don't go into like big thing, just like, oh no, I'm just going to create an altar, but I am checking in, with that altar, like, how am I, what's going on, and sometimes if I want to change something significant in there, then I kind of at least like smudge or do something. If I do a sacred fire altar, then first I check in, am I in a good state? I usually go and do like a cleanse for like a few days actually prior to the ceremony, just because I want to make sure that I am actually in in that space when I can be more clear and I can listen, what's going on. So then on an actual day, I approach the fire pit and I put a piece of tobacco in there first, and I talk to the to the fire pit. I just say like, well, these are my intentions. This is what I'm going to do. Now I'm just going to clean it out, and so I just take a care, to clean it and just dispose of the old coals in there. If I would be digging a new fireplace, as like I'm removing some sort of a grass, or just some dirt to dig a hole for the fire, I have to do exactly the same. First I just go there and offer a little bit of a tobacco on that grass before I start digging it out. Building an altar means you are in a state of connection already. If you're holding a ceremony, even if you're holding a ceremony just for yourself and you're going to approach it in a serious way, then you want to be in that space of connection before you go into the actual ceremony. Like it's funny to start to say like, well, where does the ceremony start and where does it finish? Because to me, I often feel like, well, it starts well before I call people in and we are like officially holding a ceremony, because I need to be in that state of connectivity. And then when that's clean, then I get out for more tobacco, and then I start laying the wood. And before I gather that wood, I usually offer some tobacco to that wood, even if it's from my wood pile, and just checking with each piece of wood, like, would you like to come to the fire? Would you like to be on this altar? Would you like to be part of this ceremony? And this usually happens before actually anybody even comes or see what's actually going on. But I know to create a powerful ceremony, there's so many little things and so many little details we can build before we actually start doing, anything else. So the altars, sometimes, and maybe it's you've got an altar, like you build something in your, on your shelf, and all you do is just, sometimes clear the dust on it, and sometimes not even that. Well, that's not exactly a functional altar, especially if it's in your house. So it's a space to create connection, to basically check in, or to offer your prayers, or give your offerings potentially. Sometimes you can just bring your little pieces of food for your ancestors there before you take them outside. There's just so many different ways, how to do this. And altars to also change. They do, some, especially in a ceremonies, in a traditional ceremonies, they do have a specific things what we want to have on an altar, and yet every ceremony is different, and every altar is slightly different. And sometimes, when you get to the really place when you can appreciate the really like subtle changes, then you kind of know like those things, the objects you put on an altar, they also interact with each other. And that also then creates kind of the feel or the tone on a ceremony, because they kind of create their own little space, which then communicates with that higher, I don't know, power, or how should we call that? And that's also what makes every ceremony different. So put the meaningful objects, I'd say, on your altar. Call in whatever you want to call in, and and then we will see what actually happens. As with everything else, practice makes it. I can't give you like a perfect recipe for it, other than you just try and see what actually works. And there's different altars which could be like used outdoors, indoors. Like I've got some altars which are just outdoors, out in the garden, and I don't use them every day. But I feel like, oh, this is the place I use as an altar, and so I just treat it just a little bit more, just with a little bit more awareness, nothing else. And then here and there, I go and put even just incense in there, and I feel like because in some way, why would I have more altars at any given point? I guess because I just want to create different things, or there are different parts of me which needs to connect, deeper. And so, my nature altar would be, what I would call my wild one, which is be very different one to the one what I have inside, and I have my golden bracelets in there, which are trying to evoke something very, very different. And so, that's why I would use different altars for different occasions. One more tool what we use is, calling in our helpers. Who's going to help us, with this ceremony? I think it's just really great to acknowledge that we are not all powerful. And when we are creating the ceremony, usually we are creating because we need something which is actually beyond us, because we can't change something by ourselves, and we can't change it by our thinking mind. That is, to me, like, the main reason why I would be, going into the ceremony, really. Because I want to call in, or I want to change, or I want to let go. Whatever is what I'm trying to do, I realize I can't do it by myself, just by, repeating my own stories. So I want to call in my help. Usually what we often see when you go into the ceremonial space, people call in 4 directions, and they often call 4 elements, which is just the most logical thing to do and most commonly used. It's definitely used in traditional ceremonies. As with everything else, it has its advantages and potentially disadvantages. It's really, really useful to call these helpers in if you do have any connection with them. What often happens, in a ceremony, or I guess when we are trying to create our own little ceremony, and people are not trained in a specific tradition, then we just go like, oh well, I'm calling east, and that's associated with water and with, I don't know what, what else, whatever map the people are using. And so they just, keep kind of reading the map, and they call those things in. There's actually nothing wrong with that, other than if you actually don't have a feeling what you're calling in, it's really hard to get that real help. So, are you calling it in just because it looks good and sounds good? Or are you calling it in because you actually have relationships, with these elements or with directions, and therefore you can count on the help? I think this is quite an important thing. So I would say, if you are new to ceremony, or new to, creating your own rituals, I personally believe that it's just best thing to choose one or another, just to start with, then by all means combine them together. But you want to have a, as clear understanding as possible what you're actually calling in. I just been, attending an opening of a ceremony, which we used, both, directions and the elements, and I thought it was actually really simple and really, really beautiful done. Partly because, the person who is actually holding the ceremony know what they are doing, and actually feel, their understanding. And so, what ended up happening, which is like, we are calling, the direction of east, and we did call in the water. And why we call in water, the reasoning, which is like, we are on the east coast of Australia, we are really close to the coast, right next to us is a huge body of water. It makes sense to also call, the energy of water and the beings of the water, And I was just like, yep, that's so true, And then to the west, we called in Earth, because west of us is actually desert, and a really like huge amount of land, and we can actually feel that, because if you are traveling west, then you feel the difference from that watery element. And so that makes perfect sense. Whilst to the north we called fire, just because that's our direction of our sun, the sunwise, how it's traveling. And north of Australia is really really hot, like we are getting to the tropics. And so it makes sense to call fire, whilst it also makes sense then to call air towards the south and the south pole, and the winds, about the oceans, and that pole, because again it just brings very different energy. But facing those directions and then feeling for those elements at the same time, and it doesn't have to take a long time, yet it actually created a really beautiful and powerful space. So just taking a moment to feel what you're calling in, and bring everybody else with you, on the journey. It's actually an art to do a little bit, but practice by all means, practice. Sometimes I find it really helpful just to call the elements. One of the main reasons is because we are in connection with elements all the time, even when you are not thinking about it. Like, we are such a material beings, like our body contains so much water, and yet we are very fleshy. There is definitely that matter in us, there's this earthiness, and the same, but we are like utilizing our breath and the air, like we can't actually go without it. And so like we are actually so deeply connected to that. And what I would call as a fire in our body, is our spirit. It's is those physical processes, what then happen, like it's the energy or the chi that travels, through our veins, and that's how I see elements in my body, and so I can be connected to them. There's a lot more to the four elements than this, like I'm just going to acknowledge this is quite shallow way in some way to talk about them. And when I started studying with the Helpers Mentoring Society, in a way, like our first year was a lot just to and actually a big part of a second year, to feel for the elements, and just getting familiar with them, and going to the waters and just feeling the waters, and what does it mean to be water, how does it feel, what does she say, how does she flow, like, and just like connecting with it from all sides we can potentially connect. And so going through the different elements, like I feel there's so much more to them than what we actually just can see, or that it's like really easy to say just like, well, water flows, at least, in one of its forms, and the earth is really solid and grounding, because they do have bigger energies behind them. I think if you want to use the elements in a ceremony, it's just really good thing to practice, to take your time sometimes, and to just to observe. And again, it doesn't, you don't have to take like a huge amount of time out of your life just to do that. But if you are going for a swim, or if it's raining, just then observe, like open yourself, open your senses, and open your like other senses, to those elements. It's really, really helpful. This is exactly the same thing what we do with four directions. We can just call them in. And because, I've got the sense, like, I'm not just calling like four directions. What does it mean to call four directions? I'm calling in the helpers and the beings, what are kind of in the direction. But again, like if you feel for direction, for any direction, they all feel different, because they all have different qualities. So this is one of the things what we are actually going to practice right now. because there's almost no point actually giving you a map, just like go and recite this when you are doing your ceremony. Let's actually just take a little moment together and feel for those 4 directions. So what you will need is just like a piece of paper and a pen. This will just take us like 2 minutes, and we are going to start with the direction of west. So first, orient yourself wherever you are and find where is the direction of west for you, in this very moment. It's obviously like where the sun is setting. So when you just think like, okay, where do I usually see sunset, or where do I see those pink skies? And if you can't really remember, then get your phone out, get a compass ready. So I know the west for me is in this direction. And so what we are going to do is just to take like 30 seconds in a silence to face the direction and feel the direction. You kind of call it in, and you ask it to reveal itself to you. And then you will write down your answer, what you find out. So let's just do that. And then you are going to turn towards the south and do the same thing. And then you write down your answer, what the south revealed to you. Then we are going to turn towards east, and again, ask the direction to reveal itself to you. What is it about? After you write down your answer, then we are going to turn towards the north. And write down your answer. So this is a super simple exercise. But people often actually don't take time to explore this for themselves. And we are just following the maps. We have to also remember that, our connection is also ours. And there is, I guess, maybe this is the paradoxical part of the nature. On one hand, I am really, really big on following the traditions and not changing things. On the other hand, I also feel like we need to have our own connections and our own understanding, what it is, rather than reciting what other people discovered, in front of us. in here, like what I have is the medicine wheel of North America. So this is really kind of a slightly tricky situation, because these traditions are coming obviously from Northern Hemisphere, whilst we are in a Southern Hemisphere right now. And so their colors and their understanding and meaning would be very specific to the North Hemisphere, whilst in the South, I work with this medicine wheel slightly different, because I feel like, well, I can't just repeat this, because I feel like, well, it's not valid, it's not true in here, like we work slightly differently. But I still would like to show you what it looks like for North America. Like, so if I just type in a Google, give me medicine wheel of Lakota, then this is what I will get. So let's remember, like, north is and north in the actual language means towards the pines, because and it's represented by white, because there's usually like snow, and it has a specific meanings. So have a look at this, what does it mean, and how you actually resonate with these things. And on the next slide, then I'm going to actually share with you the map that I'm using for Southern Hemisphere, which has a slight change to pretty much to all of it. So like in here, like we've got for East, we've got a adolescence, and we've got a summer, whilst for North in here we've got elderhood, and for West we've got adulthood. The wheel I'm using in here, it's slightly different, and if you just look, like I also actually move the colors around. So this is the traditional Lakota wheel. This is what I'm using in here, and I got very influenced when I was reading Soulcraft by Bill Plotkins, and he's also like working with a medicine wheel in a specific way, and this is what actually makes most sense to me. And so when we are doing different things, or we've been laying a stone circle, then I really wanted to follow some sort of a map which makes sense to me. So to me, the East would be the beginnings and the birth, and it's the springtime, or the early morning. Whilst in the North, what it means, it's it's that fiery nature, and it's the summer, it's the joyful parts, if something which is like really creative. And it's also adulthood, when we are actually on a top, in a way on a top of our own power, and we've got like plenty of experience, and we can do all of these cool things. Whilst then when we are turning towards the West, towards the setting sun, to me that's the elderhood, and the autumn or the evening, and it's the ripening, it's the harvest time. It's using all of the skills what you already learned. It's also like kind of preparing for the rest. And it's also if you're talking about elderhood, like it's also more like a giving advice, or if not advice, it's actually more about a giving rather than taking in some way, which to me, like the childhood and adulthood is still a little bit associated with. And then we travel to the south, and again, because in here it faces the the South Pole, which to me, like, well, that's the winter, that's the deep rest, that's the composting part, that's the stuff, and we actually don't do anything, like in women, like this is the menstrual time. This is just to go really like within. This is not the time to necessarily starting new projects, but it's such a potent time, where we just let everything kind of mingle together and rest, and then we can start those new things. Like in some way, this is where you plant seeds, into this phase. And so when I'm calling in the directions, then to me, like this is, this is what I kind of keep in mind in some ways, like these are the energies I'm calling in. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean this is right. And, directions are more complex than this. And, to be honest, like I've been working with them, and I'm studying and I'm still, not only I'm unclear, but more I study and more I feel into them now. I'm just thinking like, wow, there's so much more to it. And so, I find it quite exciting to learn these things. Okay, one next thing which is really important, with the ceremony, or now, this is, I guess, the part, how do we open, and therefore also how do we close a ceremony? This is actually one of the most common mistakes when I see when people creating their own rituals and ceremonies. They open something, they start a ritual, and then they actually almost forget what they've been talking at the beginning, and then they forget to close it properly. So what is a ceremony? Let's remind ourselves again. It is a space which is a closed space. So I see it as a circle. So it is a closed space where something can happen, a transformation can happen, or healing can happen, or blessings can happen, but in a way we are channeling the energies in, and either we channel them around the altar. Sometimes we don't have to use an altar, when we've got, for example, a women's circle or a blessing way or something, not necessarily have an altar, but you call energies in, and then at the end you kind of have to also like close it and call them out. So when we are calling, for example, 4 directions, and I was talking at the beginning, we are calling we are talking about the Tonka Shilas, or we are talking about the grandfathers or grandmothers. You want to, whatever you call in, you want to treat them as your elders, and you want to treat them with respect. So you don't just call them in and then you kind of left them sitting around, and then you forget about them, then you say, thank you to everybody who is present, but you actually forgot to do anything about those energies. Because if you do that, plenty of times, they might just go like, well, you know what, maybe I will come next time, maybe I won't, like, maybe I'm just not treated well enough in here. So whoever you call in, make sure you also actually mention them at the end with a gratitude for the help. This is really, really important. And this is what actually closes that circle and keeps that energy, within. So if you are trying to do some sort of a healing for yourself and you don't close your ceremony, then it feels like that the circle is then, well, not closed properly. And so the energies can actually like leak out. This is what sometimes also happen when people hold, big ceremonies, and then, an experienced elders come into the area and they say like, oh, there's just lots of random walking spirits. And this is what actually can happen if you don't take care to close your ceremony. You can sometimes call very, very powerful beings and very powerful spirits. And then if you actually don't know, or you just simply forget to send them back to where they came from, they can kind of just keep wandering around. You call in your ancestors and then you don't make sure that you finish the ceremony properly. Then, and people do experience this, and I hear sometimes, our local Aboriginal people talking about it. It's like, well, there's lots of wandering spirits. Like, where did they come from? Like, they've been obviously called in here from somewhere. So, don't take it actually very lightly. The ceremonies are not just for a show, they are actually to create work. So this is your responsibility. Please take care. when we are, I guess we can just move on, like, in which way can we open the ceremony? And in a similar way, we will be probably closing the ceremony. We are just going to check what are our basic tools, to start the ceremony. So we've got our intention, we've got our altar, that's prepared and it's laid down. And then we are going to open that container, we are going to open that circle. So there's a few ways. The most common way is to use your voice, or to use a drum or some other music instrument, or a dance. Maybe you've got other special ideas or special tools, what you can use, because I have no idea what sort of, space you want to prepare. And sometimes there is, of course, a time and space for a silence. Let's explore the first one, like your voice. What is the best thing to use? Like, what's better? Is it talking or is it singing? Traditional ceremony would say sing. Sing the container open. Use your voice. Use the power of your voice. It actually doesn't matter if you are a good singer or bad singer, because, again, the intention is what matters, and the way that you sing from your heart matters. It also matters what sort of you sing. In some way we would say the first song is the most important song, because that actually specify your intention for a ceremony. So, just be kind of mindful. If I would be using a sacred fire, we would sing 4 songs at the beginning, and the very first song we would sing would be a 4 directions song, which would be, calling those 4 directions and acknowledging the grandfathers that are coming, from those sides, and we could be like offering them tobacco, to those 4 directions. So, we are not just calling them in, but at the same time we are, offering tobacco to 4 directions, like, and this is also like for you, so you can come and join us and also like enjoy yourself. Doesn't necessarily mean this is what you have to do. I'm just saying it's one of the examples. Really great opening songs are also the songs of gratitude, or anything which has to do with the nature elements. So if you've got songs in your repertoire, you can just find them on a YouTube, which has to do with the air or with the fires, or and just acknowledging those. They are actually really, really helpful songs and really appropriate for opening a ceremony. So, like you have your intention and maybe you call in the 4 directions or the elements, or, and this is how you're opening the ceremony, maybe you just call in those things, those elements or directions with your actual song. If you don't feel comfortable with singing, then definitely speak up, those words of invocations. And it could be something really, really simple. Something like, energies of West, I'm calling onto you. Please come and help us. At this point, you can also put a little herb offering, being it tobacco or being it a sage, or, it depends what ceremony you are using. We've been talking about a mugwort, or Australian herbs. It doesn't matter. In some way, you have to have some connection with those herbs, and that's what you then offering. Everything what you do in the ritual is to strengthen your connection. So whatever you have a connection to, then use those tools, and then, along the way, develop other connections. Because I come, from Europe, and, a couple of years ago, we went traveling through Mongolia and Siberia, like basically looking at different shamans and studying, different ways, and they don't offer tobacco, they offer grain constantly. So whatever they do, they like not only to the 4 directions, but it's like, or the 4 directions, and again it's very similar with the North America, like it's also kind of with the ancestors. So we would be throwing a grain in the different directions, or we would be then throwing the grain onto the fire, if that's the nature of the ceremony. So for example, for a solstice, that's exactly what I would do. Like I would give everybody a small pinch of grain, and get everybody to throw it into the fire. So there's definitely many different ways how you can approach opening the container. Singing is called one of the most powerful ways together with drum. If you can't sing and you can drum, then drum. If you can't drum, you don't have a drum, and you can play any other music instrument, by all means use it. Why is drum used is because it's one of the first musical instruments, I guess, but because we can create a rhythm and a repetition. And in a ceremony, this is really important, because with the repetition, you create a specific way of how you can help people to get into that trance. So this is why we also sometimes use a shamanic drumming journey, just to go deeper, because it has a power to take us back, and it kind of takes us to our less complicated parts of ourselves. It's like taking us to our primitive brain, and the primitive brain understands very different things than our overthinking brain. So what we are trying in a way really hard in a ceremony is to get out of our normal state of consciousness and into a different state of consciousness. If you are a facilitator or participant, it's the same. We are trying to access a different parts of a consciousness in this very natural way, and to be then open, to what else can happen in that space, because so we are in a very receptive space. So you can use then that singing, and if you use a song, they are often sung a few times. It's a repetitive song. You don't just sing like it's like one complicated song. Again, simplicity is the key, and if people can sing with you, so much better. So choose like simple repetitive songs, and then you can turn towards the different directions, and you just keep singing the same song. Ideally you can just do like each song 4 times into all 4 directions. You can also choose to then sing to 7 directions. So other than just singing to the basic 4 directions I've been talking about, you can also sing to above, to the below, and to the direction which is kind of everywhere around us. It's this 7 direction, it can be complicated, because sometimes we refer to it as like that's within. But then again, when we look at some teaching, well, what is within? The within actually contains everything, and so it's kind of both. So it's in and so it's out. It's all encompassing in some way. And so you can sing these songs. I put in here on this slide the song I sometimes use. I really like it. It's really simple. It's Nako and the Medicine for People. Nako is coming from North America, and has roots in the traditional culture, and so he is translating some of the traditional songs so they're actually accessible for all of us. This is also a really good time to remind everybody, or to explain why you're doing the ceremony. I know it's in your heart, but it's actually really great to state what is going on. It's helpful actually for you as a facilitator, and it's really helpful for anybody who is participating. What are we doing in here? What are we trying to achieve in here? And also, if you this also helps to, if you call in the four direction, it's actually really helpful to explain your intention loudly. So these spirits, or this presence what you've got, around you, they also understand what you're doing, so they can actually help you better. It's pretty simple, but it makes a big difference if you state that intention, and you can also then see better results. So I talked a little bit about the music instruments, what you can use. You can use crystal balls. You can use, drums or a flute. Again, the repetition is the key. Here is another example. Let's see if this plays. Nope. So this is exactly actually from Siberia, from our travels, where this man is, the way he holds, and that's all he does. Like, he's just doing kind of a ceremony pretty much every day, and he is using the rhythm, and singing of specific mantras, or using old language and chants as a way to get into the trance. So when we went to see this guy, and he was telling us, well, one of the members of our family needs healing. So, well, that's good. Like, can you then help us? And he said, like, yeah, but you just have to wait at least an hour until I actually get into the zone. And so then, and he would just use his small, medicine drum and chanting and, burning lots of herbs until he can actually get to that space, whilst we've been just, waiting. And so for us, it was just more like enchanting just to watch that, even we were not necessarily invited or included, in this way. Talking about the chants and singing and talking, silence is as important tool in any ceremony. Again, sometimes what happens, people get nervous and they just feel they need to talk through the whole ceremony, because the more facilitation the better, because then they feel they're actually doing something. This usually actually doesn't allow the space for the actual whatever needs to happen in that ceremony. And so, like, having experience, like, somebody's inviting me to go on a deep journey, through the movement, and they just keep telling me, like, that I need to go deeper and then go deeper and, listen to the music and move and go deeper, and now find this spirit animal and then do this and then do that. And I was like, I actually don't have a chance to go deeper, because, in my experience, there was so much facilitation that actually, all I could hear was the voice of the facilitator, but it didn't actually give me chance to connect with what I really, really wanted to connect to. So, it's okay, that can happen. I'm just saying the silence is as important as you facilitating. I'm more a quiet type. So, I have a tendency, if anything, to leave more silent spaces. It's also maybe because the nature of my work, I hold the grief ceremonies. And so, once we open the ceremonial container, then I feel my role is just to hold the space and to actually be silent, so people can process their stuff, or it gives them chance to talk what they need to talk about. My place is actually just to hold back. If I hold a different kind of a ceremony, like, yeah, let's say we do a solstice ritual, and on this specific one, we've been, for example, offering different herbs to the fire. Like, my role is to set a scene and to to maybe tell stories about the herbs or explain why I'm using these particular herbs. But then again, just to step back and let people actually experience what they need to experience. And then it's okay to actually let them sit in the silence, let people sit around the fire. Like, why not? And then people can either then talk and connect, or they can connect more to the fire. Like, it's okay to let people do their thing to the level. Of course, you are limited by the time. Your ceremony is running, and then if you actually feel that the energy is really like fizzing out, then you have to check, and this is your job as a facilitator. Like, well, what's going on? Why the energy is not holding? What needs to happen? Do we need to have another song? Or do I need to invite people to actually do something? Do I need to do something as a facilitator? And this is the part where why you're practicing all these connective practices, really. Because if you are not in connection in that moment, then it's really hard to know what you need to do. And that really depends on every ceremony. Like, I don't know what you need to do. Sometimes I don't know exactly like what do I need to do, except I just have a feeling like, well, something is not right. So what would my teacher say at this point is just pray about it. And sometimes I would just then, like take a little bit of a tobacco and just sit with it, and I would then ask, what do I need to do right now? What is it? What is not working? And hopefully at this point, like, you can get, your answer. And if you don't know your answer, then you have to try a few things. And, as I said before, practice makes it. So, don't panic. I'm sure it's going to be fine. I also mentioned, like, one of the ceremonies, and, and big transformation can happen through a dance. So, if you choose like not to sing, but actually use a movement as a creative force, that's a really, really beautiful way, how to create a flow and also get out of the head. That's, constantly what we are trying to do through a ritual or ceremony, to get out of the head. It doesn't matter if you are doing a ritual just for yourself and you are going to do it just for like 20 minutes. You can open it, and you can open it with a dance. And if your ritual looks like, I'm just going to light a candle and I'm going to dance in my room with some beautiful music, it can be a really potent space. So just do it, or, facilitate it for other people. Again, like, check with your audience what feels good, how much talking you can do, or you just let them, move. Surely there is some guidance needed, at some points. Sacred theatre, a really, really beautiful and powerful way how to get people to drop into the unusual space. Sacred theatre, I find, or I guess like the way I usually witness it, in a ceremony, is more that people are performing it for other people, and then in that way they are, drawing us in. It's quite rare that, we are invited to participate in a sacred theatre. Either way, it's a really beautiful and powerful to act. There's something different. If you are, and this is actually really beautiful and powerful ceremony. What I read, in one of the women's circles, when the women are working with the different archetypes, or different goddesses, what they do is to actually use the sacred theatre, because then they decide, like, okay, this time, this month, we are exploring this archetype or this goddess. And so then they agree that one of them is going to embody this archetype. And it's a really, really powerful practice. Again, you want to set you're seen really well and you want to hold the circle well. So then this is up to all the women actually, hold that potent space. Because if you're calling in a very potent archetype and you're working with it, again, you don't want to let it fizzle. One of those reasons is also if you want to really embody it and let it speak to you, then you want to hold that container so it just doesn't go off and wandering, all over the place. And then you just figure out well, what do I want to wear? What are the attributes of this archetype or this goddess? And then you just calling it in. Again, the song is really, really powerful way, or dance is really powerful way. But acting it, and then enacting it, letting it speak through you, and offering, it's kind of like a very conscious channeling. And so this is one of the ways how you can use the sacred theater. If you decide to do this, just remember one of those things we've been talking about at the beginning, what you call in, you also want to, at the end, think and make sure you actually really, really move on. So if you decide to embody something, and after you decide okay, I'm stepping now out of this archetype, you do it in a very physical way. I'm stepping out, you're stepping sideways or back or in whichever way. You're taking the clothes off you've been wearing for this archetype. You smudge yourself, that's the easiest thing to do. Ideally you then go and have a bath or have a ritual bath if you're somewhere out in the nature. You want to come back fully to your own normal present form, and you want to make sure that you give offerings to this archetype, being it the herbs or the food or whatever, thanking it profoundly, and then sending it back, and saying this is now finished. And you kind of go to wherever you were coming from, so you don't leave these wandering spirits around. Let's have a look what we've got next. Yes, the closure. So as we've been talking about it, whichever ceremony you decide to do, small or big, gratitude is really, really important at the end. When we're doing sacred fire, again, we are singing 4 songs at the end. And, there would be, either traditional songs, or you again, find, what's appropriate. At least one of those songs really need to be a gratitude song. Again, singing, towards the elements, or, being in a oneness. There's so many great songs, if you don't know where to look, then go and have a look for Alexa Sunshine Rose, or go look for A Beautiful Chorus. There's actually, I can't even think, because there's so many great songs and great singers that are providing songs for a ceremony. If you've been using any herbs which been kind of in a practice in a ceremony, my general practice is especially if you're offering little bits of the herb to the fire, or a little bit of a grain, then at the end of the ceremony I have a tendency to actually then use everything what is left there, at that closure, look, this is all that is offered, or what was offered, this is all for you. I'm not holding anything back for myself, so here it is. It doesn't mean that if I've got a whole smudge stick like this, for example, that I'm just going to put it in a fire. Smudge sticks I usually just use for people when they're entering the circle, before we started the ceremony. But if I'm using different herbs, in a small amounts, during the ceremony, either to put in the water or in a fire, then I have a tendency to use them all. Before the actual closure, but that actually does symbolize the closure. Again, it's really, really good to know when you're closing and to actually announce it. So, sometimes you feel like you close the ceremony and you feel good and complete, and people start looking around. It's like, so is this it? Is this closed? Or what's happening now? Just be very clear, like, and just say very specifically, we are now coming to the closure. We are going to thank all the elements, what we call in. We are going to thank the direction, what we call in. We are going to thank the archetypes we are going to call in. And we are going to thank each other, for being in a ceremony together, for creating that special circle together. So whatever you called in, you basically want to close and announce this is now closure. And after this you can walk in whichever direction you want, for example, or you are free to sing whatever songs you want. It's kind of up to you, or now it's time for a dinner, or whatever is happening. So just be very clear with that beginning and with that end. And obviously thank everybody who was with you, who was helping you through the ceremony. If you've got any teachers, it's really good to acknowledge them in that ceremony. Yeah, I'm pretty sure like that's it. So we are now coming to the closure of of this little workshop. It wasn't held as a ceremony in any way, but just talking about the closure, it's good to know. If you've got any actually questions, or you need to, or you would like to actually help with designing your own personal ceremonies, then please let me know. Look me up. I'm on a Facebook, Instagram, under my name, Maja Krasna. You can email me at majakrasna@gmail.com. And I think, what I would like to actually offer before we close completely is just an example, just to put it together, just to basically summarize it. What can a ceremony look like? Because I know we just talk about different different elements, but what does it look like at the end when we are putting it together? So like, in a way, it's a recap. I'm just going to pick one ceremony which I held, just on the top of my mind. So it's not a traditional ceremony, so it's something what I created. Therefore I find it like more useful for anyone to actually use. So the ceremony was for a remembrance of Mary Magdalene. I feel really, drawn and connected to this figure, and so every year I tend to celebrate it in some way. So this year I decided to call in a group of people, men and women, and we gathered together for a walk in a labyrinth. I live in a place where we've got a really beautiful little church, and behind the church is actually a labyrinth which is open to public. So I go there and walk it fairly often, because I find like that's one of my practices to do. If I've got a deep questions and I really don't know which way to go, then I just go and walk the labyrinth. So the ceremony we called in was actually really, really simple, but really beautiful. So we gathered just at a sunset, because that's usually the time of a transition, and I find it usually very helpful time. So just before we gathered before the sunset, and then I would create a little altar. The altar would be made for Mary Magdalene, and what I would put on the altar, on this incense. So I would have like a burning charcoal with frankincense and myrrh burning on it for a smell. I would choose, these herbs or these resins for a specific reason, because they are used in church, and they've been also used, in those times where Mary Magdalene would be alive. This would be a smell which she would be familiar with. And so if I'm trying to invoke something, especially, if it's now we can call her, like, she became one of our archetypes, but she would be, a living being. I would still try to connect with her, through the smells, what would be familiar to her, or if we evoke something enough times, then it creates a certain pathways. That's why we use, when we pray to certain deities, we usually use, for example, in India, we would use, specific chants, because that's, they are already created like those ropes of connection, or the highways you can travel then much, much easier with. So for her, I would be choosing, this specific, incense, to burn. I would put on an altar things what I would consider, being as a feminine symbol. So I would have a shell in there. We would have a milk and wine actually on an altar, as a offerings. I would be thinking, like, what sort of grain or what sort of food, would I be using in those times? Like, okay, what I can think of is some flatbread, so then I would just use that, as an altar. And it's really, really simple, but to me, like, this is the offering, and then we would just arrange it in a really beautiful way and say, like, this is the altar, and then when everybody gathers that at a sunset, we would light the candle, and we would light that incense, so we evoke it. And then, I would speak, we would create a circle, and then, I would speak and just say, like, well, this is why we gathered, this is what we are trying to invoke, like, we are trying to remember certain ways of, of being, or, what does it mean, this archetype for us, what does it mean, the sacred feminine, in this day and age. And then we would all grab a candle, and I asked everybody to bring a candle and to bring a rose. And so, everybody would come to the altar and just light their candle from the main candle, which is on the altar. And I would send them, walking with a rose candle and actually a small vial of wine, and I send them walking in a labyrinth. And at this point, because we are lighting that candle just at the sunset, so by the time we finish our, the talking, the opening of the ceremony, then, it would actually be dark, and so everybody would be walking with a candle in the labyrinth. And this is the time when we are actually silent, because everybody's then in their own journey of discovery, like, well, what does it mean for them, to be in this ceremony? Why did they come, And so then walking the labyrinth, when they come in the middle, then they offer the wine, on the ground, and they, as a symbol of blood, and the rose, as the symbol of beauty and life. And we would just then all gather in the middle of the labyrinth, holding our candles, and we would just stand there in a silence. And we would just stand there in a silence. And the space is really potent, as we, nobody's saying anything. We're just standing there, with our silence and with our roses. And then, slowly we just feel, okay, it's kind of done, and we start trickle, outside of the labyrinth. And that's, that's the ceremony. And so then, to close the ceremony again, I would thank the people. I would thank this archetype, to Mary Magdalene, who came to us. We would blow the candle out, and we would consider the ceremony closed. And then and then people, like, then have a choice to leave or just hang around. And, if they wanted, they can just walk the labyrinth a few more times. But this is just a very simple way, how to create your ceremony, So we set our intention, we create an altar, we create our offerings, we do, you can say like the ceremony is actually just walking the labyrinth. And then we are finished. We state, this is finished. We are closing, the altar. We are deactivating the altar, by blowing up the candle, and the incense is now spent and done. We're thanking everybody, and we finish the ceremony. So this is a really simple way how you can, create your own space. So, talking about different ceremonies, and this is, I would say one last thing. If you are interested to do any ceremony with me, like next year in May, I am doing a 4-day retreat, which is about burning the witch, or more specifically, the intention is to provide healing to men and to women who have and still experience some trauma, or remember like being burned as a witch. This is actually a really, really deep trauma, and I observe it in lots of people, like coming from Europe and having those connections in there, and being the witch. To me, it's the tradition of the wise women. Is the herbalist, is the women who knew about secret knowledge, and they usually knew about life and death through being, for example, midwives, or like using different herbs, or having access to the herbs what can alter your consciousness. Therefore, you can connect to the to the different parts of yourself. And I think we are still experiencing that trauma quite deeply to this day and age. And what does it mean to be a wise woman? What does it mean to be the carrier of wisdom? And, when this work came to me about 10 or 15 years probably ago, when I was like, actually, this is what I need to do. And which is what really put me into like, I really want to know more about rituals. And I have designed a ceremony like quite a few times. And at the end, this is what actually prompted me to go and study with Helpers Mentoring Society and with, Lakota traditions, because I feel I need something solid rather than just figuring out my own ceremonies. Because I feel this is actually my deep work, this is my calling. And, over the last couple of years, I feel I have put together a really, really powerful ceremony, which is going to take us 4 days. And, one of those, ceremonies will be also like holding the sacred fire, and praying to our ancestors and praying to all of those women who got burned. Plus many, many more really deep practices which we are going to do. So it's not going to be exactly an easy retreat, if you can even call it a retreat. It's going to be lots of hard work with lots of transformation and lots of trauma activation. So we will have to be, we will be looking obviously like after ourselves. We are going to be in a very beautiful surroundings, in a really beautiful retreat. We are going to have a beautiful food. And so, I invite you to come in. You will be well looked after. Yeah, and I believe that if you are drawn to ritual and ceremony, this is going to be a really potent place to learn more. So let me know if you are interested. Thank you so much for watching, all of this. I really hope this was helpful. And yeah, if you need anything, please let me know. I'm really happy to help. Bye-bye.